Your access badge doesn't work anymore," the intern said, holding the door with an awkward smile. Troy thought firing me quietly while I was out of office would clean up the mess. He just forgot. I'm the one who built the emergency exit. And it was never connected to a badge. My name is Sean Whitaker. I'm 50 years old, and for 15 of them I was the guy they called when things went sideways. My official title? Senior Client Relations Executive at Halverson Strategic Partners. Unofficially, I was the insurance policy, the fixer, the name that showed up in inboxes when $1 million account started going cold. I didn't go to Ivy League schools. I didn't speak in buzzwords or show up to meetings with slideshows and metrics. What I did have was a gut for people and a memory like a steel trap. I remembered which client's kid was allergic to peanuts, who just lost their mother, who needed an extra 30 days without having to say it out loud. And that's why they stayed, not for the brand. For me, Halverson wasn't always this polished. When I came in, it was 3 desks, 1 flickering fluorescent light, and a dream held together with duct tape. But it had potential, so I stayed. Built the client base from the ground up, skipped vacations, missed birthdays, chose midnight flights over dinner tables more times than I'd like to admit. My marriage didn't survive that rhythm, but the company did. The company thrived. Jessica, my daughter, once told me I sounded more like a firefighter than an executive. Maybe she was right. I was always the one flying out last minute, smoothing over disasters that someone else created. But I did it because I believed in what we were building, a company where loyalty still meant something. And for a while it did. Until Troy arrived. Troy Ellison, freshly imported from some leadership accelerator, came in swinging phrases like digital first and revenue per head. He looked at my track record and saw a salary he could split into 3 interns. He looked at my experience and called it legacy knowledge. He never once asked how we landed or kept the top 10 accounts, but I could feel it in the air. The quiet shift. My name started disappearing from the CC lines. Meetings were scheduled without me. My assistant got reassigned, and I knew. Still, I said nothing. Just kept doing my job, delivering, smiling, watching. Because the thing about being in the room when everything was built is knowing exactly where the cracks are now. Back then, Halverson wasn't even Halverson. It was just HSP Solutions, a placeholder name for a company that hadn't figured out what it wanted to be yet. We had 3 clients, 2 laptops, and 1 shared vision: survive. I still remember the first pitch deck I helped write. Half of it was smoke, the other half mirrors. But it worked. Barely. Over time, the chaos turned into structure. I built the first CRM spreadsheet myself, using formulas I taught myself on YouTube. We landed a logistics firm in Indiana, then a packaging deal out of Austin. Word spread. Not about the company, about me. "Call Sean," they'd say. "He'll handle it." And I did. I wasn't flashy, but I was relentless. My phone was always on. I answered emails before sunrise, and slowly we became real. Headcount tripled. We opened our 2nd office. We made the shift from hustle to operation, from survival to strategy, but along the way, something shifted, and not for the better. It didn't happen overnight. These things never do. First, they moved my desk, claimed it was temporary during office renovations. I went from the window to a corner near the copy machine, the same machine that jammed every hour like clockwork. Then came the reorg charts with unfamiliar names. Meetings where I used to present, suddenly rescheduled. But not for me. I'd walk past Troy's office and see him in closed-door huddles with consultants who used words like optimization and resource efficiency. Not once did anyone ask how the company kept our top clients for over a decade. They didn't need to. I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. My travel budget, slashed, expense reports, delayed, the assistant who helped me coordinate 16 contracts across 4 states, reassigned to marketing. Troy started praising fresh perspectives in team calls, usually while staring at the new hires straight out of college, who nodded like they understood client retention because they'd read about it in a business blog. Meanwhile, I kept doing my job, quietly, meticulously. But I saw the way they looked at me, like I was a VHS tape in a Netflix world, a symbol of a version of the company they were trying to forget. And then came the interns, bright kids, full of ideas, none of which had ever been tested under pressure. I trained 3 of them in 1 quarter, taught them everything I could, not because I wanted to, but because I was told to. Handing over client histories I built over years to people who didn't know the names behind the contracts. Then one of them, fresh-faced, eager, ambitious, accidentally CC'd me on a planning email I wasn't supposed to see. Once Sean transitions his portfolio, we can finalize the leadership shift. That was the moment I knew. They hadn't just found my replacement. They were already calling him Next Gen. The funny part? They thought I'd go quietly. They expected me to disappear into some semi-retired haze, playing golf on weekdays and reliving my glory days over overpriced whiskey. What they didn't realize, and what Troy never took the time to ask, is that I don't play golf. I play long games. When they handed me the transition folder, I nodded politely, then filed it away in a drawer I never opened again. Stopped answering late-night calls from panicked interns. I let the reminders slide. I watched the cracks form in the exact places I once reinforced. The first client drop came a week after I left. Quietly, without drama. No explanation, just a canceled renewal and a vague, "We're going in another direction." I smiled when I heard about it. That client had told me years ago, "If you ever leave, I go with you." And he meant it. Then, another, and another. Emails started coming. Soft, hesitant. "Hey Sean, quick question. Do you remember how we used to handle?" I didn't respond. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Focused on watching the machine I built begin to sputter, without the mechanic who knew every bolt by name. Focused on the silence that followed when no one stepped up to catch the falling pieces. Focused on the message behind every unanswered call. "You let go of the wrong guy." 2 weeks after my name vanished from the Halverson staff directory, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Maya Ellington, VP of Client Strategy at Thorne & Brook. We'd crossed paths back in 2014 during a multi-agency nightmare that only resolved because I personally flew across the country to fix a problem her own team couldn't untangle. "Still allergic to inaction, Sean?" she asked, half laughing. "Always," I replied. She didn't waste time. "We're watching Halverson fall apart from the outside. 3 of your former accounts just reached out to us. Problem is, we don't have anyone who knows them the way you do. You interested in fixing that?" I didn't say yes, not right away. That would have been too easy. Instead, I asked to meet in person. Over coffee, Maya slid a folder across the table. Inside was more than an offer. It was recognition, of experience, of loyalty, of results that couldn't be replaced by younger, cheaper enthusiasm. "We want you to lead the entire transition team," she said. "You'll have full control, no buzzwords, no babysitting." It wasn't just about pay, it was about principle. I shook her hand and walked out of that cafe with something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. The next 72 hours were a blur. Calls, messages, NDAs. But one by one, they came to me. Clients I'd once served under Halverson's name, now ready to follow the person who actually showed up when it mattered. By the end of the week, 6 accounts had migrated. 2 more were in talks. And Halverson? Halverson was panicking. I heard through the grapevine, and by grapevine I mean a former junior manager who still texted me like I hadn't been fired, that Troy had called an emergency meeting. Client. Retention is in freefall. Their new account execs were scrambling, pulling up old CRM notes like they were treasure maps without keys. Then came the email, from Troy himself. "Hi, Sean. I was wondering if you might consider consulting with us short-term during this transition. I believe your insight could help stabilize some of the legacy accounts." Legacy accounts? I laughed out loud. No response. No reply. No courtesy. The next day I signed the final document with Thorne & Brook, officially onboarded as Director of Client Restoration. My terms, my tempo, my team. The difference? Here, they didn't see me as a relic. They saw me as the foundation, and, while Halverson scrambled to rebuild what they'd so proudly dismantled, I was already 10 steps ahead, turning their collapse into my blueprint. The meltdown wasn't loud, it was quiet. The kind of slow, embarrassing unraveling that makes people avoid eye contact in elevators. At first, Halverson's strategic partners tried to pretend everything was fine. They posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn, hired a fresh-faced head of client success who smiled a lot but couldn't answer a single technical question. They launched a rebranding campaign with a new logo and a vague slogan about forward synergy. Meanwhile, clients were bleeding out of the system like unplugged power cords. Vendors stopped offering grace periods, deadlines got missed, contracts lapsed quietly, without fanfare. I heard Troy was hosting weekly damage control calls, one-on-ones, team huddles, even a surprise visit to the Chicago office. But it was too late. You can't throw glitter on a cracked foundation and call it innovation. The people who knew how things worked were gone, and the ones left, they were scared to admit they didn't know what they were doing. One day I got a text from Valerie, the same one who'd asked me in the elevator if I was changing offices. HR is in full panic mode, she wrote. They're digging through old emails trying to piece together client histories. Troy's threatening legal action against ex-employees. I smiled. And then the letter came. A thick envelope marked, Confidential Legal Department. Inside, a cease and desist order. Apparently, they believed I'd interfered with proprietary relationships and engaged in unfair competitive practices. Cute. My lawyer, a quiet genius named Rena who once taught contract law at Columbia, laughed as she read it. They're grasping. You built your reputation. Their mistake was thinking they owned it. We sent back a single-page reply. Mr. Whitaker has complied with all legal and contractual obligations. We suggest Halverson focus on internal structural weaknesses instead of external scapegoats. The silence after that was deafening. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't need to scream or break things, watching them collapse under their own arrogance. That was enough. It was an email I was never supposed to see. A former colleague, let's call him Anthony, forwarded it to me late one night with no subject line, just 2 words. Thought you should know. It had been buried in an internal thread about cost optimization initiatives sent a few weeks before I was pushed out. The sender? An external consultant named Morgan Reese. The same one who kept showing up in Troy's closed-door meetings. The email read like a blueprint for betrayal. Line by line, it laid out how legacy staff with long-term contracts and non-scalable methods were to be identified and transitioned out. Not for performance, not for strategy, for optics. Younger staff create a more dynamic brand image, it said. Phasing out outdated voices signals innovation to investors. Wasn't a liability. I was a PR move. The kicker? They'd been planning it for months, long before Troy ever mentioned restructuring. My replacement had been hired under a different title weeks before my final client meeting. They let me travel across the country, land 2 major renewals, smile for the company photos, all while prepping my exit slide. And Troy? He hadn't come up with the idea. He was following orders. The whole thing was orchestrated by the same private equity firm that backed Halverson's last acquisition. The same firm that once asked me, during a board dinner, why are we still relying on individual relationships instead of scalable systems? They never wanted people like me, people with memory, people with loyalty. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, feeling that mix of anger and clarity that only comes when everything suddenly makes sense. The missed meetings, the silent permissions removed, the forced training sessions. It wasn't incompetence. It was design. I forwarded the email to my attorney and to Maya, just in case. Then I sent a single message to Anthony. Thank you. A week later, the email leaked. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. People talk. Quietly, but they talk. Especially when they realize they might be next. The fallout was immediate. LinkedIn posts disappeared. "We're hiring." Banners were taken down. Clients started asking questions Halverson couldn't answer. Internal Slack channels buzzed with panic. Someone in legal even tried to claim the email was fabricated, until Morgan Reese himself issued a very carefully worded statement that confirmed its authenticity, within context. Troy? He stopped showing up to meetings altogether. Last I heard, he was on sabbatical. But here's the thing. I didn't feel vindicated. Not exactly. What I felt was seen. For the first time since this whole thing started, the truth had a name. It wasn't just ego. It wasn't just a generational clash. It was a system, deliberate and cold, that treated experience like a cost, not an asset. They tried to erase me from the blueprint. Turns out, I was the foundation. I didn't want another job. I wanted a mission. At Thorn & Brook, they didn't ask me to fit in. They asked me to lead, and this time I didn't just rebuild, I redesigned the entire system from the ground up. No more patching over someone else's broken framework. No more fighting for the bare minimum. I was finally building with intention. First thing I did? I tore up the old client protocol. The one that used to take 14 steps and 3 approvals just to authorize a callback. I replaced it with what I called the 90-minute rule. No client should go more than 90 minutes without hearing from a real person. Not a chatbot, not an auto-reply. A person. Next, I built a team, hand-picked. People who still believed that trust couldn't be automated. I brought in Lillian from Arizona, a veteran from a competitor who left because she was tired of being told that relationships didn't scale. I hired Ben, one of the interns Halverson had overlooked, who sent me a handwritten letter when I left. The kid had more heart than half their boardroom. We didn't chase trends, we chased trust. Every policy we rewrote, every system we launched, it all centered on one thing: people over processes. And it worked. Within 6 months, Thorn & Brook had absorbed 5 of Halverson's major clients. Not stolen, absorbed. Those clients came willingly. Some even thanked me for finally picking up where we left off. That line stayed with me, because it proved something I always knew deep down. The work had never been the problem. The system was. I made it a point to be present. I showed up to onboarding sessions. I answered late-night emails. I called clients just to ask how their week was going. Not because it was in the manual, because it mattered. And something shifted in the company. The culture changed. You could feel it in the way the new hires spoke up in meetings, in how clients responded to proposals in hours instead of days, in how we didn't just retain, we grew. Organically, authentically. I didn't hang plaques on my wall. I didn't need titles with 5 syllables. What I needed was to look around and see that we were building something real, durable, something that wouldn't crumble the moment someone with buzzwords and a budget walked in the door. One afternoon, Maya pulled me aside. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "keep doing it. You're not just restoring clients. You're restoring belief." That hit me harder than she knew, because after everything, the dismissal, the silence, the letters, the lawsuits, I wasn't just rebuilding a career, I was rebuilding myself. I was in Denver for a client summit when the call came in. It was from Brandon Chen, a senior partner at a global investment group I'd never expected to hear from directly. We'd crossed paths years ago, back when Halverson was still on its way up and Thorn & Brook was just a name I kept in my back pocket. Now apparently that pocket had turned into a lighthouse. "Sean," he said, voice calm but intentional, "we're acquiring 2 firms in adjacent sectors. One of them used to be a competitor of yours. We're building something new, but we don't want just numbers. We want culture, legacy, stability." I didn't say anything at first. "We want you to lead the integration," he continued. "Not as an executive for show, as the foundation. Full autonomy. Build it right." I asked for a week, and during that week I thought about every handshake I'd made over the last 15 years. Every deal that almost fell apart but didn't. Every name I still had saved in my phone. I thought about the people who got swept, aside the interns who never got a shot, the quiet professionals who held companies together behind the scenes. I thought about Jessica, about what it would mean to finally create a place that didn't just chase growth, but earned it. When I said yes, I had one condition: no recycled leadership. I didn't want ladder climbers who spoke in strategy slides. I wanted people who knew what it was like to hold the line while others disappeared. People who stayed when it wasn't easy. People like Lisa from accounting, who once whispered in the hallway, "They don't know what they're doing." People like Anthony, who risked his job to send me the truth. People like Ben, who wasn't even supposed to matter, but did. Brandon agreed, and just like that, I found myself at the helm of something bigger than I'd ever imagined. Not out of vengeance, but out of vision. There were no revenge speeches, no mic drops, no walking into boardrooms with smug grins. That's not how real power works. Real power is quiet. It shows up on balance sheets and in the voices of teams that finally feel heard. It shows up when a client calls to say, "This feels different," in a good way. So I built. Not for headlines, for legacy. And this time the terms were mine. It was a Tuesday morning when I walked back into the same building where they once handed me a cardboard box and told me I was too expensive for where the company was headed. But this time, I wasn't holding a box. I was holding a briefing, folder, and the authority to decide whether Halverson's strategic partners would be part of our new integration model or left behind. The lobby hadn't changed much. Same glass walls, same scent of burnt coffee and recycled air. Except now the receptionist stood up when I entered. She didn't know who I was. That made it better. I didn't ask to see Troy. Word was he'd taken an extended leave after the leak. The position hadn't been filled. That didn't surprise me. There are some messes you can't delegate. Inside the conference room, in the same one where they'd once handed me termination papers with polished smiles, I laid out the new structure. Calm, precise, no gloating, just facts. Lisa was there. She gave me a half smile. And across the table sat a few familiar faces who used to avoid mine in the hallway. Now they leaned forward like students waiting to be graded. And I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold. I was efficient. The deal moved forward, but not on their terms. Halverson would no longer set the pace. They'd adapt or be phased out. Their processes would be audited. Their client handling, standardized. And the people who once whispered about being next-gen would now follow frameworks I'd designed from scratch. When I left the room, no one applauded. No one clapped my back. And I preferred it that way, because I wasn't there for celebration. Was there to close the loop. Outside, I paused by the security desk. The guard was new, younger. Didn't recognize me, but the moment felt full circle anyway. "Have a good day, sir," he said. "I already am," I replied, walking out without looking back. I could have retired. After everything, the offers, the position, the respect finally restored, and I could have walked away, bought a place by the lake, answered emails only when I felt like it, disappeared into peace. But that's not how I'm wired. So instead, I started teaching. Not in a classroom, in boardrooms, coffee shops, late-night Zoom calls with rookies who reminded me of myself before the gray hair and hard lessons. I showed them what real client relationships looked like. How trust isn't a metric and leadership isn't a title. I didn't just want to lead anymore, I wanted to pass the torch. Ben, the kid from Halverson they almost forgot about, he's now running our client retention division. Jessica? She left corporate law and joined the foundation I helped launch. She says she finally understands what I was trying to build all those years. It wasn't just a career, it was a legacy. The truth is, I never needed to prove my value. It was never about shouting, demanding, or forcing anyone to see it. Because real value, it echoes, quietly, in the systems that still work long after you're gone, in the people who remember how you made things work, not just what you did.